Today is Monday, February 24th, 2025. I've got 7 o'clock, so let's go ahead and call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order. We will get started with items from the Department of Finance. We have an ordinance authorizing supplemental appropriations and waiving second reading. Good evening, Director.
Good evening.
And Director.
So as discussed during the budget process and also with the Capital Advisory Committee, with our new procurement policy and the capital improvement plan, removing old process where we would encumber anything that was appropriated for capital and roll it over. So now showing a little bit more transparency in what we're doing, and rather than just rolling those over as encumbrances, evaluating, determining that they will move forward, then asking them for it to be reappropriated. So that's the request. Supplemental appropriations to appropriate for the projects as listed in those amounts for 2025.
All right, thank you, Director. Any questions or discussion from my colleagues? Mr. Schnetzel.
Thank you. So just to recap, this is, I guess, with the capital improvement, Kevin, remind me what's the group called? Advisory Committee? Right. Mm-hmm. Capital Improvement Advisory Committee. This is part of that process, right? Where things that are not spent, they go back, and then they're essentially reappropriated in the following year?
Yes, and then there's a limit. So there is a 3-year limitation. If there is no movement in 3 years, right, there would be more in-depth conversation about why they're not moving and do we really need to reappropriate or not.
Okay. And while we all know this up here, for the record, anybody that might be viewing at home or the minutes, these are all projects that were previously approved.
Correct. These are 2024 projects that were approved.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or discussion? I do have one. Could you explain the request for waiver?
Well, since they were already appropriated in 2024 and vetted at that point, we didn't feel that we needed to have a second reading on these items.
Is there a need to appropriate the funding by a certain timeline, or?
Well, we want to get it in place so it doesn't stall bidding. So we have to have the appropriations in place before they can start the bid process.
Yeah, and it's not all of them that would be stalled. Price Road is one on there that would potentially be stalled. There's traffic control systems on there that would be stalled to get intersections into the queue to be rebuilt, similar to what we were doing at Stigler in 62 a couple weeks ago. Traffic cabinets, as an example, are a 20 to 25 week lead time, and without the funds being appropriated, we can't technically order that. I think this puts a third or fourth intersection in the queue for this year to be rebuilt.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification and the explanation. I think I've made no bones about my general discomfort for waiver, so I do appreciate the explanation. Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, just one quick follow-up. Could you just review very quickly the Price Roadhouse project, what that encompasses, and kind of where we are with it, if you have that?
It might be a little tough to pull out of the back of my brain. I know that they're very close to. We presented that one more in depth during the budget process. Please don't ask me for numbers because I don't. Okay, good.
But just broadly,
yeah. So last year, in large part last year, they were reviewing the actual program, the actual design and program of what would be going into Price Road, and really preparing it for bid. They had bid it 23, I believe it was bid in 23, and the bids came back very high to the point where we actually didn't have a good bid. So they kind of went back to the drawing board to a certain degree. They got the bid documents a little bit more specific and a little bit better from a construction standpoint, a constructability standpoint, and that bid is ready to go back out to the public here in the next few weeks.
And broadly, that is going to be a facility for the Parks and Rec Department to host programming, camps, and other types of youth and other types of Parks and Rec programming at that facility?
Correct. Yep. So whether it be summer programming, camps, interpretive center, outdoor classroom, I believe is being thought of for down there. So it includes renovation of the interior spaces of the home, the structure, And then the construction of 2 parking lots on the facility, one on, I guess, what would be the east side of the property, and then one on the west side as well. And then there's some trail improvements around the backside, so on and so forth, so.
Trail improvements to connect to the Big Walnut Trail and parkland that's owned by the city.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Schultz.
You're welcome.
Mrs. McGregor.
I noticed the sewer for Gahanna Lincoln capacity, why are we paying for that and not the schools?
This is for the increased capacity, for the more of the entire district, everything that is west on Granville. So it's upsizing the line as it's running under the BP. We're removing it from running under BP. We're running it in just south of, on the BP property line versus our property line, and then it's also taken the opportunity to upsize the line as well. The school is improving the line as it runs through their property, where I'm not exactly sure what the exact issue is with the lateral as it runs on their property, but that's one of the improvements that they're making as part of the project.
Thanks.
Any other questions or discussion for this item? All right, seeing none, since waiver is requested, this will be on for a vote on the 3rd. On the regular agenda, please, Mr. Clerk. All right, thank you very much. Next up, we have items from the city attorney. We'll turn things over to you, City Attorney Tamala Harrison.
Thank you. So the first item, well, this first two are in conjunction. It's an ordinance to amend the general offenses code and the traffic code to comport with recent state law changes. All of the changes are simply just mirroring state law changes. I think the biggest substantive change is the increase in penalties for OVI offenses. Everything else are more minor changes in several other areas of code. And I am requesting a waiver of second reading on this because the state code sections take effect April 9th. And so, and I just received the Muni Code red line from our codifier recently. So I turned this around as quickly as I could. But if we were to do a second reading and then wait 30 days, we would be beyond the April 9th date. So by doing a waiver here after the 30 days, we would have an effective date of April 9th to be completely coinciding with the state law changes, so that there's no overlap one way or the other, that we're behind or ahead. And then, would you like me to go on to the third item?
Let's pause there and see if there's any questions on the first two there. Anything from my colleagues? All right, seeing none. Third item, please.
All right, thank you. The third item is a resolution determining the projected total population and selection of successor members of the Board of Trustees for the Gahanna NCA. Back last year, we passed a resolution establishing the NCA, and that had a requirement in it for us to, within 1 year, follow up with selecting a method of selection for successor trustees. And with discussion and consultation with Jacqueline from Bricker Graydon, who is counsel for the NCA, we are proposing that the successor trustees be appointed instead of elected due to the cumbersome process of elections. It's similar to an HOA election. It's not a Board of Elections election, if that makes sense. So in order to be more streamlined and efficient with our appointments, I think an appointment itself is more appropriate. There is a second red line, and I apologize, I got stuck in my draft folder, so you did not get that until just now, but it is nothing substantive. It's mostly just cleaning up some of the language and taking out any redundancies to streamline the text of the resolution. So the red line is something that I have collaborated with Jacqueline from Bricker Graydon on, and we're in agreement on this language. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this. A lot of the language is similar to our previous resolution. The biggest change there is just stating that we are appointing successor trustees. And I want to be clear that that is an alternative selection method that is authorized under the ORC. We just have to make a finding that that's appropriate, which this resolution does.
Thank you, City Attorney. Any questions or discussion on this item? Mr. Schnetzer?
Thank you, Madam City Attorney. Any other surrounding communities that use that alternative method that we might be familiar with? I certainly don't disagree that it's easier. I'm just curious how common it is.
It's my understanding that that is the only way that, that surrounding communities have been using, that nobody actually uses the election process.
Perfect, thank you.
Mrs. McGregor, did you have your hand?
Not about this, but about the two before.
Yes.
Is there a reason we're not doing second reading and then emergency?
Yes, because emergency would make it effective immediately, and then we would be beyond we would not be exactly at April 9th. So with an emergency, we would waive the 30 days.
But it would be a second meeting in March, so that would be before.
Correct, so then we would be ahead of the state law changes.
Right.
So I would like it to be exactly April 9th. So when the state law code change takes effect, our code takes effect.
Okay.
So I don't want to be ahead of because then we would be more restrictive than state law. So I don't want to
Gotcha.
invite any issues.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think I saw Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, thank you. Back to the NCA resolution. I think it was my initial understanding that trustees would ultimately be residents of the community in which the NCA is encompassing. Is that included in this resolution? Because I'm not sure that I see it.
It is not a requirement of the alternative selection method. It, I believe, is still best practice to seek residents to serve on the board, but it's not a requirement. So if there's not enough interest in the community to serve on the board, then we would have the opportunity to maintain current trustees in those positions.
So a couple things. I think, is there a way to structure this so that this first composition, because there aren't residents populating it yet, could be not, we don't need to necessarily specify, residents or stakeholders in the district, but could we enshrine in the resolution that best practice, that should be a preference to select from residents of the area? Because that was really my understanding of what we were going to be doing with the NCA.
I don't see any reason why we would not be able to do that. I will confer with Jacqueline also to make sure that there's no issues, but my interpretation of the state code is that we would be able to, that you as a collective body would be able to determine what criteria you want to use for that selection.
Yeah, I think just, and I welcome feedback from my colleagues on this point in particular. Okay, I hear Mr. Schnetzer saying he agrees. I see nodding from my colleagues. Okay. But I think that it would probably be better to enshrine that into the legislation so that future councils understand the importance and the intention of ensuring that there was representation of the community in which is going to be assessed.
Yes. I can do a new red line and circulate that prior to the next committee, or the next council meeting.
And is there a timeline in which this needs to be adopted?
The requirement is within 1 year of the previous passage of the resolution, which was on March 18th.
Okay.
Since this is a resolution and not an ordinance, it would take effect immediately. So March 18th is our goal.
So as long as we adopt this by March 17th, we'll be on track?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, City Attorney.
You're welcome.
Anything else on this item? So is it the will that this come back to committee, or, okay.
Yeah.
We'll come back to committee, and then we'll anticipate the 17th for this one.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, for the first two items under the city attorney, those will be on for the 3rd, on the regular agenda for a vote. All right, moving right along. Next up, we have items from council members. First up, we have the joint resolution and proclamation advocating for local infrastructure investment and calling on Congress to maintain the tax-exempt status of municipal bonds. First, want to thank Clerk Van Meter for his efforts, as well as everybody who's offered comments, either at previous meetings or done their own advocacy on this item. I view the resolution as just one form of advocacy. The resolution was brought about following our general discussion in Committee of the Whole several weeks ago. Last week at Council, I mentioned in the correspondence and actions section of the agenda that Ohio Municipal League and National League of Cities are very aware of the item and are advocating on their own as well. So want to thank everybody for the collective effort. Mr. Schnetzer, do you have anything else you'd like to add on this as a
Appreciate your help
prelim?
on this.
No, thank you. Happy to take any questions or discussion from my colleagues. Mrs. McGregor.
When we pass this, then what is it just pass, or do we send it? Do we send notice of it to like our representative, to the people that makes a difference?
That was the general discussion from a couple of weeks ago, that we would send this at least to our members of Congress, House and Senate, as well as we discussed the 2 members from Ohio that serve on House Ways and Means, and as well as Ohio Municipal League, of course.
Correct, and I would suggest that since this is a joint proclamation resolution, there's a cover letter that perhaps goes from council leadership and myself when it gets forwarded.
Good with that?
Yes.
Anything else on this item? Any other questions?
No.
Then, as this is a resolution, we'll put this on for the 3rd. All right. Consent, or does this need to?
Consent's fine with me.
Consent, okay? All right. Thank you. Next up, from Council Members Bowers and Padova, a joint resolution and proclamation designating March 2025 as Women's History Month in the city of Gahanna. And this year, I did not skip over this item on the agenda, Ms. Bowers, so thank you.
Thank you for remembering that piece. Do you want me to go ahead and introduce it? Okay. So as we have done in the past, we would like to again recognize Women's History Month. Thank you to council office staff for assisting in putting this together. It is hopefully pretty straightforward. I know that there's been an opportunity, hopefully, from the mayor to review this as well, as I know I did, and I think Ms. Padova did as well. I have a potential recipient in mind. Her name is, London, and I just blanked on her last name. I apologize. London Studer. London was a graduate of Gahanna Lincoln High School last year, and she has broken barriers with regard to female participation in baseball. She participated internationally on a competitive women's baseball team and has an incredible fastball. So we are hopefully going to be able to recognize London Studer with this History Month recognition. Any discussion or questions?
I would just say thank you to you both for your efforts.
No problem.
Seeing none, we'll put this on for consent on the 3rd then, please. All right. Next up, we'll turn back over to Councilmember Bowers for a discussion on elected official salaries.
Yes, thank you, Vice President Weaver. Okay. I know that this is a sensitive subject. I absolutely appreciate that. And I guess I want to just start a little bit by level setting that I think all of us share the sentiment that service before self is the most important thing about what we do here. And all of us and our predecessors have certainly made sacrifices to serve and serve for the joy and pleasure and privilege of being able to do this work. I wanted to take some time to review a little bit of background about why I'm bringing this up, why I'm bringing this forward, and the history of pay ordinances for elected officials here in Gahanna. So I'm going to refer to the memo that I submitted and just kind of take this sort of step by step. As I think a lot of folks know, there of course has been a long history with Gahanna being undercapitalized, right? There's been deferred maintenance, certainly deferred capital projects, and that also included salaries remaining artificially low and to the detriment of the city. A couple of years ago, we have reviewed, done a considerable amount of work on a compensation plan and salary studies for city employees and have tried to meet the market in order to attract and retain talent. We also have an obligation to review elected official compensation. Pursuant to the charter, this does rest with the council in terms of determining the salaries and compensation for the elected officials. And as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, the charter requires that the salaries continue in effect from term to term. So you would make if and when a council adopts an ordinance, a salary ordinance, it's effective the start of a subsequent term after elections. So as I've identified in the memo, subsequent effective terms are identified. For mayor, it would be January 2nd of 2028. For city attorney, there's actually kind of an oddity in the charter about this, but it says that if it falls on a Sunday, then the start of the term would be January 3rd, so the day after the Sunday of 2028. And then for council at-large seats, those would also be January 2nd of 2028. And council ward seats, if effective at the start of the next term, would be January 2 of 2026, if we were to take any action on this. By way of some history, I'm going to start with council salaries first. So back in 1999, 26 years ago last week, council passed an ordinance raising the salaries from $600 a month to $800 a month, which is $9,600 per year, effective January 2nd of 2000. The prior ordinance actually had been passed in 1995, raising the salaries from $400 a month to $600 a month, effective January 2 of 1996. So in that situation, we actually saw increases by $200 over 2 immediately successive terms. Since then, there has been only one ordinance in 2006, 19 years ago, where council adopted an ordinance to supplement the council president's salary by $100 per month, effective January 2nd of 2008. Since that time, there have been no adjustments to the salary. So just to put a pin on that, there have been no adjustments to council salaries other than the council president's salary for 26 years. The city attorney's salary was last set by ordinance in 2019 with an effective date of January 2 of 2020. Prior to that, the salary was $65,563. What I find a little bit interesting is that at that time, the ordinance actually allowed for kind of a graduated increase, which I would defer to the city attorney as to her judgment about that, but I'm not sure that I read term to term in its plain language as permitting that. So the current salary is $80,765, which was effective January 2 of 2023. The mayor's salary was last set by ordinance on July 5th of 2011, effective January 2nd of 2012. And what this actually did was to just maintain the salary that was effective on January 2 of 2011 that had been last adopted in 2006. So really, the last time that council set the mayor's salary was in 2006. So there has been no adjustment since that time. So it's been 20 years since that has been really revisited. I mean, it was revisited in 2011, but quite a long time. The mayor's position and the city attorney's position are considered to be full-time, and the mayor is restricted on activities in which they can engage while they serve as mayor. The city attorney is permitted to maintain a private law practice pursuant to the charter, but Code Section 14303 does still require it to be full-time effective January 2 of 2020. So as I mentioned, in a couple of years ago, Senior Director Vollmer brought forward significant research from Clemens Nelson with regard to adjusting municipal salaries. And at that time, we received a significant amount of information that senior directors and directors and other city staff were significantly underpaid, and it was contributing to the high rate of turnover that we were seeing here in the city. I have identified in the table on page 2 under section 2 some of the hourly rates for the mid 5-year, which is the middle range of what each of those senior positions it earns, and that annualized salary is based on that mid-year 5 hourly rate. So to highlight that, I wanted to mention that all of the directors, I believe, are paid more than the mayor at this time. Both senior directors, the senior deputy director, the director of public safety, and the chief of police all earn significantly more than the mayor's salary is currently set at. The assistant city attorney, who works at the pleasure of the city attorney, at that mid-range earns $97,676.80. So $17,000 and change over what the current city attorney's salary is set at. I have provided, moving on to the elected official compensation sort of comparables that we have from various surveys and studies across the region. I have attached the OML City Salary Survey 2023, and as well as the 2024 MORPC Salary Survey, which goes into really in-depth analysis with regard to pay across the region, not just for electeds, but as a percentage of total revenue of a city. With thanks also to support from Clemens Nelson, there's also an elected official salary from last year dated 7/10/2024.pdf that provides some comparables, as well as some research from above and below 10, so the above and below 10,000 cities council and committee meeting frequencies. That takes a look at cities of comparable population size and identifies meeting frequencies. So from these various charts, I have pulled together what I think are some reasonable comparables based on size of the city, also based on the fact that for the ones that are outside of central Ohio, I have referred to those because, one, they're charter cities versus statutory cities, and they are also similarly situated in terms of population, but they also are suburban communities of a major metropolitan area. So that's why those communities are selected. So you can take a look there at some of the salary ranges in that first chart for the mayor's salary specifically pulled out from those communities. There was also a dispatch article recently as well, so folks can take a look at that. There are a couple discrepancies in some of this research. For example, Hilliard shows a $212,000 a year salary for both mayor and for city manager. I think that's just an error because Hilliard recently changed from a mayor form of government to a city manager form of government, and I think that data just sort of got commingled. I'm not going to review the city attorney compensations because, frankly, it's very hard to find anything comparable, and the numbers are just completely all across the board. Very few communities that are similarly situated as ours have an elected city attorney. A lot of them have appointed law directors, and that really is the trend across the state. So that's really why I did not do a chart related to city attorney, but you can take a look there. Then finally, on the top of page 4, I also have a chart with regard to council members. And this is a little tricky because, again, it is difficult to find similarly situated cities that have a strong mayor form of government, that are suburban communities to a major metropolitan area, and have a similar city council structure. I tried to make sure that I included some communities that have at least a similar meeting frequency. A number of communities in the state, actually, their city councils meet far less than this city council meets. So we have, typically 4 meetings a month, with a few exceptions, and that does not include the advisory committees, appointments to like CIC board, et cetera. Finally, this is, and actually not quite finally, but finally in this memo, I've identified the reference to the OPERS healthcare eligibility threshold. This is what Mrs. McGregor brought up 2.5 years ago in terms of council member salary increase. And we were able to identify that the location and the reference point for that information. So in order for a person who is participating in the Ohio Ohio Public Employee Retirement System, the individual must earn a minimum monthly earnable gross salary of $1,000, of at least $1,000. This is more than the requirement for the service credit for the pension, but in order to ensure that perhaps a council member would be able to qualify for health insurance eligibility at the time of retirement, and they perhaps want this time to be able to count to that credit, this could support that. Given the challenges, of course, with securing health insurance, I think that this behooves us to ensure that future council members are able to ensure that they would get credit for, at least at this threshold, for their service. Finally, I do want to reference, and I did not include this as an attachment because I did not find this until Sunday night, but Ohio Auditor of State Keith Faber released a white paper, essentially, on elected officials' compensation research. And I thought that this was a really useful resource, because one of the things I think that we need to avoid is getting stuck in the trap of just looking at what's going on with other political bodies, with other subdivisions. That is one metric, and yes, that's an important metric, but that certainly doesn't tell the full picture. And so the point that Auditor Faber makes, I'll pull out a couple of points here. He says that from the rate of inflation from December of 2018 to December of 2023 is 22.1%, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. He also indicated that if inflation averages just 2% during this period, that would be a rate of inflation of 34.8% from December of 2018 to December of 2028. So when you're not at least keeping up with the rate of inflation, you're actually reducing people's pay over time. And so I think that that's something to be taken into consideration. The auditor also takes a look at other states around the region and essentially concludes that really across the board, additional information is needed. For example, being able to look at additional data related to private sector pay and other types of positions that are similar could help inform elected official pay. And that's a little bit about how I came up with the proposal specifically for the city attorney's pay. Across Ohio, a lot of assistant city attorneys, a number of prosecuting attorneys, for example, earn in the low 100s to mid 100s. That's not atypical. And in the private sector, in-house counsel ranges from about $110,000 to about $170,000 annual salary. So just in terms of looking and benchmarking some other type salary numbers. I think that this is a hard conversation to have, but I also think that it's an important conversation to have for governance of the future of the city. to make sure that we're attracting and retaining talent who are, and folks who are able to give their time. And yes, while we do expect there to be sacrifice, that we want to ensure that people, that elected office is not just available to people who have wealth streams from other sources. I don't have a distinct timeline for any of this. This can go at the pace at which council requests. We can take our time with this. If we want to solicit additional feedback, we can. And if we want to solicit additional information or data points, we're certainly welcome to as well. I do hope to bring this back to Committee of the Whole in 2 weeks for further discussion and deliberation. And as Mr. Roth pointed out, the only potential timeline that we would be looking at would be an August to potentially pass the city council salary increase before August, if we in fact want it to go into effect January 2 of 2026. With that, I welcome conversation, encourage conversation.
Thank you, President Bowers. Any discussion from my colleagues? Did I see Ms. Jones?
Yeah, I just have one question that came up, and sorry, well, I have probably more than one question, but one right now. So you mentioned looking at private and public sector comparisons, and I think you mentioned prosecuting attorney. What would be like a private sector comparison for mayor salary, and is that in anything you came across?
I think you would have to look at CEO salaries, and I don't think that that's equivalent in any way. That's part of the reason, though, why I did include the senior director pays and some of the other top non-elected positions in the city. Those have already been benchmarked against other public sector, and I think to a certain degree, there's been some consideration about how do we compete to retain talent here. Versus the private sector as well. The mayor in Gahanna is a full-time role, and Mayor Jadwin and I certainly don't agree on every policy decision, but she definitely puts in the time. And I think that if we want to ensure that future mayors continue to put in time to dedicate themselves at 40 or 50 or 60 hours or more a week, that we need to treat it as a full-time job.
Anything else from my colleagues? Mr. Renner? Yes, sir.
I am struggling, and I want to be able to choose my words very carefully so that there is no qualm. Number one, I think, Marissa, Councilman Bowers, you have put together probably one of the best pieces of, the memo, the data, the supporting data, everything that I have seen in all my time on council. I definitely applaud you for that. From a sitting council member to put all this together, to try to make these arguments, I think is really top-notch. I think there's now some of my disagreements with this is that I am not attacking anybody, and I'm not going to say that I am better than anybody. In fact, you guys know me, and I feel very humbled to be up here and to be in your presence. I've always stated that. But when I am trying to look at a budget and actually trying to figure out salaries for content managers, our specialists that we want to hire and attract, I'm okay with being able to adjust the salaries to commiserate with what is happening and to take in the data. Because I want the top-notch personnel to come to the city. I want the top-notch people to run for election out of our community. But I don't think, and this is where I disagree, I don't think salary is actually a part of that, and nor should it ever be. It is something quite different. And it should be taken in the whole, and I know everybody feels the same way, but juxtaposed to what is happening in the greater area, to our community, to our region, to our nation. Government is under siege right now. People are feeling pressure points from every direction. And I can't, in light of all of that, in light of all the suffering that's happening, I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with the sense that, and I know you stated very clearly that this is a point in time that takes care of somebody else in 26. I may not be in this seat in 26. I understand that. But I struggle with the basic idea, your last point. It was, you made a very wonderful argument, but it was the last point that really got me. I think this is a good idea, and I think in a different time, it would be a wonderful approach, and maybe, to your credit, we should put it out there, and it should be judged a different way. And I think you make a very good argument that you're not suggesting a salary based on, well, Hilliard did this, Grove City did this. I hear what you're saying, and I think that it's a good idea. But juxtaposed to what's happening, I can't support it. And nor do I feel, this is probably suicide of me, but nor do I feel that I can support something like this because I haven't done everything for the people of Gahanna that I said I was going to do. So I don't feel like I can say yes to this. Maybe I'm totally wrong, and so be it. And I would love to hear what my colleagues say on these, but I can't support any of this right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Renner. Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. I will start by saying, like Mr. Renner, Ms. Bowers, I very much appreciate all of the time and effort that went into putting the materials together that are attached to today's agenda with regard to this evaluation. I do want to make it clear that I was not part of moving this forward. I know that this was an initiative that you felt very passionate about. I think you made that very clear tonight, and I appreciate that as well. I would be, but I need to be clear. I am strongly opposed to increasing the mayor's salary. I appreciate everything that you said. What I would say is I knew what the salary was when I ran for this position twice, as did mayors before me. I didn't run for this position for personal financial gain. I ran for the privilege of being able to serve my community. I believe that as electeds, we make a choice. We make a choice to take on the responsibilities that we do. Coming from the private sector, I can tell you what I used to make years ago before I left my job to work for Visit Gahanna and then asked for the honor to serve as mayor for this city. I don't know of anyone who's a public servant who wouldn't make more money in the private sector. Yet we all make the conscious decision to work in the public sector because there are many intrinsic benefits that are not financial that we gain every day. The benefit of being able to drive down the street and see that we've made a difference in the community or talk to a resident whose lives we've impacted. I would respectfully disagree with the comment that we need to raise salaries in order to get better qualified people to serve. I think that when you look at the history of who has served this community, both in terms of council members, city attorneys, and other mayors, we've had tremendously qualified, skilled people. And I will say I came from a family with a father who devoted his life to public service. And he would have done it for free just because it meant that much to his community. And maybe that's where my philosophy comes from. My focus in this role, and I believe all of our focus should be on ensuring the initiatives that we have put into place, that we're moving those initiatives forward, initiatives that deal with the services that we're providing to residents, not only what we're providing them, but how we're providing them, so that we are making sure that we impact the quality of life for them. I do want to reference, because I know you pointed out the chart that was in the memo, just to make clear, and I think you mentioned it, but just so in case anybody's listening, these on page 2 of the memo that was attached, those are midpoint salary ranges. They are not reflective of salaries that are currently being received by directors in that position. In fact, I believe only the chief of police and assistant city attorney are at midpoint or above. Every other position on this chart is substantially below what that midpoint is. So I don't want anybody in the community to think that that's what our directors are being paid. They're not. And to be clear, the majority of our directors, with the exception perhaps of the 2 that I just mentioned, are considerably less than comparable directors in other municipalities in the Central Ohio area, $20,000 to $40,000 less in terms of what they're being paid. So I just felt that it was important to have my position on this known, since there was a lot of conversation around the mayor's position. I don't know what the next several years will hold, but I know that I know where my head was for the last 2 years and where my head would be in the future, and I would not be in favor of increasing the salary for the mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Madam Mayor, for your comments. I do want to just make it very clear, too. I did not say that we did not have high-quality elected officials in the past or currently serving. And I just want to make it very clear that I think that everyone here and those who preceded us have given their absolute best to their roles. And my language regarding attract and retain talent is paraphrasing Auditor Faber's report. So I share with you the legacy of family members serving in elected office, and very much, especially as a contract public defender in my past, and knowing the service that my family has made both in elected and unelected office. The work of public service is incredibly important, and certainly not for the pay.
Ms. Jones.
Yeah, so I do have a few additional questions, and I, also want to put out there too, so everybody knows I work HR, right? And so that is the filter in which I think about a lot of things. And so just having public conversation on salaries in my day job would make us all run in the opposite direction. So I just have to put that out there, that it's just a hard conversation to have. I think we're all aware of the social media conversation that has been happening, and so I do want to ensure that we're actually having a conversation and we're asking the questions. I feel like I did see a few today and have some that I want to understand. So, and if this is reflected somewhere and I'm missing it, how much, so if we increase all of the salaries to the proposed rates, how much are we looking at more a year? I did some, as Councilman Schnetzer will say, back of the napkin math just before we started. I don't know that I'm accurate, but I think I got around 80,000 more each year, correct? Okay, so I see head nods. I think one of the big questions out there from the community is, if we are to do this, what are we losing? And so I don't know who that's a question for, or is it we just add into the budget for next year? But I think there's this understanding that it's a balance, or if I increase this, what am I losing? If we increase this, do we not get to put money aside for other things? And so I think we do need to have that transparent conversation, because right, wrong, or indifferent, we all know behind the scenes things, our community feels like this is us being selfish and increasing, and that they're gonna sacrifice.
Ms. Bowers, did you have anything to follow up?
I don't know that there was an actual question in there, but I guess.
But it reminded me, and thank you, Ms. Jones, and I think that that's an important point. So we would be talking about And I guess I would ask Director Burry to potentially assist us in determining what the financial impact of this would be. This is, like I said, this is a starting point of this conversation, and so I would ask for your support in doing that financial impact, because it wouldn't just be the salary numbers, but as you know, of course, from your day job, there would be potentially benefit increases, additional OPERS contributions. So if you wouldn't mind supporting us with that, we would appreciate it. The other, and I thank you, Councilwoman Jones, for addressing one of the questions that was raised. There was also a fair amount of discussion and concern that this would raise taxes, or that this would cause us to not have the funding to be able to do the things that we're doing. And so this would certainly not contribute to an increase in taxes. There's absolutely no expectation, no plans, at least that I'm aware of, and certainly the administration, I think, would have come to us if there was, to raise taxes, and this would not incur that. This would not incur a tax increase.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Ms. Jones. Mrs. McGregor?
I will, one comment I did hear that was online was that we said that this tax increase would last 40 years, and I never remember that. I remember 20 years. And so for the, and it's an easy, I mean, people don't remember things, but this tax increase was hoped it would last for 20 years. It would hold Gahanna through 20 years, but not 40, so.
Thank you, Mrs. McGregor. Mr. Schnetzer?
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. I too want to commend anyone that put together the packets and gathered the data. For once, I feel like it's almost too much data, and you guys will rarely hear that from me. So obviously, President Bowers, I know you had a significant hand in this to the extent the council office did as well. Thank you. With that being said, I've got to apologize up front. It was a heck of a weekend for me. We had some family functions as well as a sick child, and then Monday being Monday, I didn't get to dive into all the data as much as I would have liked. And also, I'm still trying to wrap my head around some of the, I guess, incomparable data surrounding city attorney, which I think President Bowers, you had mentioned, that it's a very, very narrow and small universe. As well as the mayor, where there seems to be, ceremonial mayors and strong mayors and kind of everything in between. So to the extent that that warrants coming back at another committee meeting, I'm fine with that as well. But I did some back of the napkin math this afternoon regarding council, and I'm just sharing this for the sake of discussion. Obviously, that's what these committee meetings are for. The way I saw the data presented, there was, there's the universe. There was this big spreadsheet where you had to scroll all the way to the right. And then it seemed like there was an effort at least to take all of that information and get us to, a relevant universe of something that is, proximate to Gahanna's population. And I agree with that approach. I believe that was Gahanna's population plus 10,000, and then Gahanna's population minus 10,000, and then taking the, scraping the data from those representative communities. And so that was Hilliard, Grove City, Westerville, Whitehall, Reynoldsburg, within Franklin County, and then I believe Stowe, North Ridgeville, North Olmsted, and North Royalton, if I have that correctly. I guess I don't know enough about Stowe and North Ridgeville and North Olmsted and North Royalton, what their responsibilities are, what services they might receive from the county or lack thereof. But I'm just more familiar with Franklin County, and so that was kind of like the first cut that I made. So that leaves us with, again, Hilliard, Grove City, Westerville, Whitehall, Reynoldsburg, and then, of course, the city of Gahanna. In the spirit of that initial population, where it was Gahanna plus or minus 10,000 persons, I think what we're trying to do is there's like an implied correlation between the workload and the number of residents that we're serving. And again, I think that withstands logic. So I took it one step further and tried to population adjust the salary. And this is just simply taking the salary in dollars annually divided by the population, and that gets you dollars per resident. using those Franklin County communities, excluding the city of Gahanna, the average of those 5 is 30 cents per resident. And then, and for reference, Gahanna's 27. Then I just took one more, sort of peel the layer of the onion back. And again, I apologize if this is messy. This is just how my brain works here. I asked the question, are the services the same? So, to what extent might another community on this list have, say, fire service, which we don't? Just quick Google, it looked like Westerville and Whitehall had fire service. I don't believe Reynoldsburg does. I think they're serviced by the township the same way Gahanna is. I'm less sure about Hilliard and less sure about Grove City. The other question is like how many truly have a water department? I know Westerville has literally like a water plant. So again, it's just more things that they have to be responsible for. And then the other question that I asked was how many of them are city manager versus strong manager? To the best of my knowledge, Hilliard is city manager, Westerville is city manager, and that leaves Grove City, Whitehall, and Reynoldsburg as also strong mayor. And kind of the rationale or the logic behind making that distinction is, in a city manager form of government, like the city manager reports or answers to council. So council's, essentially responsible for a lot more. Whereas in a strong mayor, the day-to-day is handled by the administration, and council's, more of like an appropriating authority, responsible for the purse strings, but not receiving, emergency phone calls at 1 in the morning the way, perhaps our mayor is. So again, that would be Grove City, Whitehall, and Reynoldsburg. If we just take the average of those 3, it's coincidentally 27 cents per resident. And so, like, at least if you follow that logic, that would suggest that our current rates are in line with Franklin County peer communities with a similar governmental structure and similar responsibility. So I know that's a lot. If anyone wants me to repeat it, happy to answer any questions, but that was as far as I was able to get in about an afternoon.
A lot of back of the napkin.
It was technically a spreadsheet, yeah,
Back of the spreadsheet, back of the tablecloth. Thank you, Mr. Schnetzer. Ms. Padova.
Thank you. Thank you, President Bowers. As everyone has stated, the information that you've provided, I think, is excellent. It's very in-depth, and it provides a good understanding for why we're even having this discussion, especially for residents who, might just see this on Facebook or something. They can hopefully see this whole memo and understand why we're having this conversation, and not just because, we want to throw more money around. So thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Schnetzer, for the very detailed breakdown, because that, I think, is helpful. I do think that we do need to have more discussions over this, and I definitely want to see more of a breakdown from Director Burry that was requested. But as we've been talking about it here, it seems like we're maybe picking a piece out here and there, but we're kind of talking about these 3 salaries as a whole. And I think it's important to break them down and talk about mayor's salary, city attorney's salary, and council salary separately, because I don't want these to get lumped together and throw them all out, especially because this is very uncomfortable to talk about increasing council salaries being on council. So I don't want that to prevent us from doing right by future city attorneys and or mayors. Also, just the fact I was having brunch with friends that were actually from out of town, and just mentioned that we were having this discussion this week, and when I told them that our city attorney, the assistant city attorney, actually was paid more than the city attorney, their jaws dropped. And it was kind of interesting to see somebody who's, not living in Gahanna, but in another city, and you kind of discuss this and just their feedback on it being kind of completely out of the realm here. But I do think that this conversation is important. Not changing the salaries for 26, 20 years. That is a long time to go without salaries increasing. And I do believe, it is a privilege and an honor to sit in any of these seats. I don't think that any of us are doing it for the money. But I do think that it is more than fair to pay people for the work that they are doing, just like we do with all of our staff that work in this building every day. So especially those, including the mayor and city attorney, who are working a full-time job here, I think they should be seen the same way that everyone else working a full-time job in this building are. So I look forward to more discussions on this. So thank you for bringing it to us.
Mrs. McGregor?
One thing I want to say is, when this was passed for city council for $9,600, was it 99, is that what? It was outrageous. And there were articles in the paper, and there were people, it would be interesting to go back and see what other councils were paying then, because this was like over the top that they were paying this much for city council members when they increased it. So the fact that it has been 26 years is kind of, you think, oh, that's a lot, but that at the time, that was a huge increase. It wasn't so much, maybe it had always been an increase, but that was really kind of a huge increase at the time. So the fact that we're maybe a little bit behind some of the other cities now, it's taken 26 years for them to catch up.
I guess I did have a question about that. So in prior legislation, all of the legislation that I found, I didn't see any supporting documents provided, and very little in terms of minutes, in terms of discussion. I don't know if any of my colleagues recall conversation or how those salaries were set, but they were all unanimous votes back, every piece of legislation I looked at.
The only thing I know is I think it was Mr. McAllister that had led the charge for the president to be adjusted higher than the rest, but that's just what I've heard through the grapevine. I'm not familiar, I wasn't sitting in those meetings per se. But that would have obviously been the last time this would have been looked at. I think that was, what, 06 to 08 or something like that?
Or even the mayor and the city attorney salaries.
City attorney, yeah. I think several of us were part of those discussions. The reality is we have to recognize we live in a litigious society. I think the demands on that office are growing. I think previously, this is going from memory, it was 60-something and categorized as part-time. It had been, obviously adjusted to where it is now and required to be full-time. Again, I don't want to say more than that other than, I still need to do more work because, again, full disclosure, I didn't have the time to dig any deeper into it than that, but, it's obviously demanding.
Thank you, Mr. Schnetzer. I'll add my comments of gratitude and thanks to President Bowers for the comprehensive memo and all of the thorough research that you've done, but also from the clerk's office, OML, MORPC, as Mr. Renner pointed out, extremely comprehensive. So thank you very much for doing that. I don't ever want to put words into my colleagues' mouths, but I think we would all share that it is an absolute honor to serve our community. And I agree with Mr. Renner that government is under siege. It's a noble endeavor for anyone who wants to serve. And I give my gratitude out to everyone who's willing to serve in the public sector. As the mayor pointed out, you can go work in the private sector and make a lot more money. So kudos and my hat's off to anyone who's willing to serve. There's one line in the memo that really stood out to me and just struck me in a way, and I wholehearted agree with it. The compensation should not be the reason we serve, but it shouldn't be a barrier to serving. Taking council aside, because I view that as probably the most part-time role that we're discussing, since mayor and city attorney are full-time, many communities contract out their legal services to not only have an elected city attorney in a city our size is rare, but to have someone who is from that community doing the legal work on behalf of the community, who also has their own stakes and roots in the community, is unique and powerful in its own way. And to Mr. Schnetzer's point, the demands on that office are numerous and challenging, and we do live in a litigious society. We see that in the reports the city attorney delivers. That's what I have to say on the city attorney. As for council, it is, of course, an uncomfortable conversation, but I would make very clear that, and I think the memo does, and Ms. Bowers has stated unequivocally, that charter does not allow us to vote on our own salaries for the current term. And that is for mayor, city attorney, or council. That these would only take effect at the expiration of the current terms. I do wholeheartedly believe that anyone who serves in public office and is paying into the OPERS system should be eligible to purchase insurance through OPERS. And that was the reason this conversation came up in the first place. So all that being said, and the mayor's salary, I do believe is frankly below peer communities where you have a strong mayor. Again, a strong mayor, form of government, even based on the data that we saw here, is paid less than the typical city manager is paid from the peer communities. I would wholly support my colleagues who want to see more information and data or have additional number crunching they want to do. Mr. Schnetzer, you mentioned possibly having this come back to committee. I would support that for further discussion and encourage my colleagues to take a look. So I guess my question to the body is, what is the will of council? Would folks like to see this come back to committee in 2 weeks?
Yes, please.
I see a sufficient number of heads nodding, so I would ask that the 3 items come back to committee in 2 weeks, please, Mr. Clerk.
And is it
Yes,
clear
Ms.
on
Jones.
what we would also like, so Director Burry and our Councilman.
That was the next question.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry,
No,
I'm
no,
taking
no.
your job. Go ahead.
No, if I misstate or omit, please let me know. I know Mr. Schnetzer had maybe a
I
more
was just
formal napkin map.
Napkin?
I was just going to go to tabs 2 and tab 3 on the spreadsheet.
Okay.
The big monster that's sitting in our files.
I love it. Director Burry, are you clear on what the ask is? Thank you very much.
And is 2 weeks enough?
Is 2 weeks enough, or okay.
Thank you.
Anything else on these 3 items? Okay. Seeing none, we'll have those back in 2 weeks. Anything else for the committee of the whole this evening? Seeing nothing, I thank you all. We'll adjourn.